Well, good afternoon, everyone. Today's lesson is going to be in response to views of the endowment as being merely symbolic, not literal, the temple ordinances not being literally necessary for exaltation in the celestial kingdom. This seems to be something that I've seen many Doctrine of Christ people kind of articulate a view that they don't think the temple ordinances were literal or necessary, but merely symbolic. And so this is going to be kind of counteracting that view because it's not just them, but I've seen mainstream Latter-day Saints articulate similar things about the endowment. And so this is going to be a pushback based off of what Joseph Smith taught about the endowment ceremony. So to start off with, Joseph Smith taught the temple ordinances were necessary for a fullness of salvation to attain celestial thrones. So on January 20th, 1844, Joseph Smith said, quote, "The question is frequently asked, can we not be saved without going through with all those ordinances? I would answer no, not the fullness of salvation. Any person who is exalted to the highest mansion has to abide a celestial law and the whole law too." Then on April 8th, 1844, at the General Conference, Joseph said, "The declaration this morning is that as soon as the temple and baptismal font are prepared, we calculate to give the elders of Israel their washings and anointings and attend to those last and more impressive ordinances without which we cannot obtain celestial thrones." So those are two very explicit statements by Joseph Smith on the necessity of the temple ordinances. And another piece of evidence to argue for their necessity would be that Joseph Smith taught that the saints who would do baptisms for the dead wouldn't just need to do baptisms for the dead, but also go through with all the temple ordinances proxy for their deceased ancestors so that they could also receive the full blessings. And so if the ordinances were merely symbolic, then that concept of proxy work for the dead going through with all the endowment ordinances for them would not have been it would have been a silly thing for Joseph to require if it was just merely symbolic and not necessary. So continuing, um, this is kind of these are the two quotes I've leaned on in the past, but then I realized recently in thinking about it because somebody kind of talked about the signs and tokens being merely symbolic and not actually being literal, and that Brigham was kind of being silly for believing that they were literal. And I was kind of surprised that um, a, a pretty smart scholar and researcher would articulate that idea and basically kind of imply that Brigham Young's teachings were not in harmony with Joseph Smith in that regard. And so it made me reflect on Joseph Smith's teachings. I realized that Joseph Smith's teachings on the importance of the signs and tokens is further evidence that Joseph Smith taught them as being necessary and literal in certain contexts and not just symbolic or figurative. And there is strong symbolism in the signs and tokens. No one, I'm not denying that. I'm not denying that there is very powerful symbolism and mystical aspects of the endowment ceremony, but there's also a literalness to those ordinances as well. So this is the quote that I heard a historian kind of scoff at or kind of be dismissive towards. He said, "Let me give you the definition in brief. Your endowment is to receive all those ordinances in the house of the Lord which are necessary for you after you have departed this life to enable you to walk back to the presence of the Father, passing the angels who stand as sentinels, being enabled to give them the keywords, the signs and tokens pertaining to the holy priesthood, and gain your eternal exaltation in spite of earth and hell." So continuing, I mean, so they try to say, oh, he said this in 1853 as if it was kind of a later innovation in the ceremony. Um, but he said this as early as August 8th, 1844 during the succession crisis, which indicates this was something he was taught by Joseph Smith, not something that he came up with. So he said, quote, "The 12 have the power now. The 70s, the elders, and all of you can have power to go and build up the kingdom in the name of Israel's God. Nabu will not hold all the people that will come into the kingdom. We want to build the temple so as to get our endowments. And if we do our best and Satan will not let us build it, we will go into the wilderness and we will receive the endowment, for we will receive an endowment anyhow. Will you abide our counsel? I say again, my soul for any man's, that they will abide our counsel, that they will go right into heaven. We have all the signs and tokens to give to the porter at the door, and he will let us in. So again, another statement by Brigham on the literalness of these. And I don't necessarily know of Joseph Smith directly mentioning the signs and tokens in this way, but he talked about them being given to angelic messengers. So, and this kind of, there's a statement by Heber C. Kimball that kind of indicates the concept of sentinels, between, that you have to progress through before getting to God the Father in the celestial kingdom. Heber C. Kimball said this idea goes back to Joseph Smith. He said, Joseph always told us that we would have to pass by sentinels that are placed between us and our Father and God. Then, of course, we are conducted along from this probation to other probations, or from one dispensation to another, by those who conducted those dispensations. So, one of Joseph Smith's early statements that alluded to the purposes of the signs and tokens being a literal thing to detect true and false messengers comes from his statement on May 1st, 1842. It's in his journal and also in the history of the church. He said, quote, "The keys are certain signs and words by which false spirits and personages may be detected from true, which can't be revealed to the elders till the temple is completed. The rich can only get them in the temple. The poor may get them on the mountaintop, as did Moses." So detecting false spirits with the keys was referencing using the true order of prayer to discern between true and false revelations. Detecting false personages with the keys was referencing Joseph Smith's teachings that true angelic messengers would deliver their message with a certain order of the priesthood, that they would use the keys and signs to prove that they were that they were sent from God, and this kind of fits with Joseph Smith's teachings on which are found in section 129, which I will talk about in a minute. But the true order of prayer was not just merely symbolic, but they taught that it was literal and a powerful tool to commune with God. And you see this as early as the Nauvoo Temple revelation, where it alluded to keys to be able to ask and receive. Of Joseph Smith saying that there was keys to be able to obtain revelation, referencing the teachings in the endowment on the true order of prayer. And so Bathsheba Smith remembered this in a statement she recalled of Joseph Smith's teachings in the 1890s. So it's late, but it's cool because she was a participant in the anointed quorum and received temple ordinances from Joseph Smith in his lifetime. Her statement reads, quote, "I heard him, Joseph Smith, preach that the ancient order of Abraham should be restored. In Nauvoo, at his home, while playing with my baby boy, he said the children were the honor, glory, and royal diadem of woman. Once, when speaking in one of our general fast meetings, he said that we did not know how to pray to have our prayers answered. But when I and my husband had our endowments in February 1844, Joseph Smith presiding, he taught us the order of prayer." And I think her date's wrong. I'm pretty sure she and Lord J. Smith got their endowments in December and January of 1844, but he's going off of memory, kind of giving a rough idea, I think, of when they received their ordinances. So the purpose of this presentation isn't to do a deep dive into the true order of prayer and what was taught about its significance, which has been by and large lost to modern Latter-day Saints, but just one more quote on the importance of it to detect true from false revelations. So this statement is by Orson Hyde. He said, quote, "There is a way by which all revelations purporting to be from God through any man can be tested. Brother Joseph gave us the plan, says he. When all the quorums are assembled and organized in order, let the revelation be presented to the quorums. If it pass one, let it go to another. And if it pass that, to another, and so on until it's past all the quorums. And if it pass the whole without running against a snag, you may know it is of God. But if it runs against a snag, then, says he, it wants inquiring into. You must see to it. It is known to some who are present that there's a quorum organized where revelations can be tested. Brother Joseph said, let no revelation go to the people until it has been tested here. So just a good statement there by Orson Hyde about the importance of um, the uh, signs and tokens and true order of prayer to detect true from false revelations. And the quorum references the anointed quorum or holy order, where Joseph performed those ordinances and which regularly met to continue to perform true order of prayer. So another statement by Joseph Smith about the keys being used to detect true revelations and from false revelations and true messengers from false messengers. So this is on April 28th, 1842, to the Relief Society. The minutes record, he, Joseph Smith, exhorted the sisters always to concentrate their faith and prayers for and place confidence in those whom God has appointed them to honor, whom God has placed at the head to lead, that we should arm them with our prayers, that the keys of the kingdom are about to be given to them, that they may be able to detect everything false, as well as to the elders. And so earlier in those same minutes, I don't have it in this quote, but he said that the saints whose integrity had been tried and proven faithful might know how to ask the Lord and receive an answer, was one of the purposes of the temple ordinances. So, so there were multiple statements by Joseph on this. And so I believe that section 129 of the Doctrine and Covenants, verses 4 through 9, also alludes to this teaching. And Joseph didn't directly, explicitly mention the signs and tokens, but I believe that was the context, which is implicit in this statement. So he said, when a messenger comes saying he has a message from God, offer him your hand and request him to shake hands with you. If he be an angel, he will do so, and you will feel his hand. If he be the spirit of a just man made perfect, he will come in his glory, for that is the only way he can appear. Ask him to shake hands with you, but he will not move, because it is contrary to the order of heaven for a just man to deceive, but he will still deliver his message. If he be the devil, as an angel of light, when you ask him to shake hands, he will offer you his hand, but you will not feel anything. You might therefore detect him. These are three grand keys whereby you may know whether any administration is from God. And so Alpheus Cutler, who is another individual who had received his endowments in the anointed quorum in Joseph Smith's lifetime, made direct reference to this purpose of the signs and tokens of the endowment. He said, again, how did you know that angel to be an angel of God? Who tried him, and how was he tried? In what priesthood did he deliver his message? So, there's some other interesting stuff with the Cutlerites, where because they also preserved the Nauvoo endowment to a significant degree, that when the RLDS Church took off and by and large, you know, rejected the Nauvoo teachings and the endowment ceremony, Cutlerites could relate to Brighamites in that they both understood, that the temple ordinances were true and restored by Joseph Smith. So another place where Joseph Smith's teachings on the signs and tokens being used to detect a true messenger from a false, discern between a true messenger and a false messenger, is in the endowment itself. And I believe this is in the endowment to the present day. This is from the transcript from ldsendowment.org, where this is on the left side is the pre-1990 version, and on the right side is the post-1990 version. But Adam tests the messengers that are sent. And the messenger became known as Peter after the apostles incorporated Peter, James, and John into the ceremony probably I think about a week into the Nauvoo temple endowments. I don't personally think that I'll explain in a minute why I personally disagree with that, but this is kind of the dialogue as it was preserved in Utah Mormonism. So Peter says, Adam, we are true messengers from the Father, and have come down to give unto you further light and knowledge he promised to send you. Adam says, how shall I know that you are true messengers? Peter, by our giving unto you the token and sign you received in the Garden of Eden. So then Peter takes Adam by the hand in the first token of the Aaronic priesthood. Adam, what is that? Peter, the first token of the Aaronic priesthood. Adam, has it a name? Peter, it has. Adam says, will you give it to me? Peter, I cannot, for it is the new name, but this is the sign, and this represents the execution of the penalty. So then Peter demonstrates the sign and the penalty as he says this. So then Adam says, now I know that you are true messengers sent down from Father. So then Adam says to those going through the endowment, these are true messengers. I exhort you to give strict heed to their counsels and teachings, and they will lead you in the way of life and salvation. So, this is, probably a lot of mainstream members don't even grasp that this is pointing to the signs and tokens being used to detect true messengers from false messengers. But, one thing that's kind of disputed in the endowment is the incorporation of Peter, James, and John. And I've had a friend who's a brilliant historian and a scholar kind of defend the apostles choosing to incorporate Peter, James, and John in the endowment ceremony because he said, the telestial room, or as it was originally laid out, and this teaching was kind of not, it was kind of lost over time, but the telestial room was supposed to kind of give you a summary of the dispensations and basically teach that, 6,000 years have passed and that this is the dispensation of the fullness of time, and kind of relate Joseph Smith's story. And so the telestial room or world room of the temple was supposed to be Joseph Smith's story. And so he argued that Peter, James, and John being incorporated makes sense in as much as they were key to Joseph Smith's story, where the authority was restored by them to Joseph Smith to reestablish the church, etc. And so I can see that argument, but what I think is not a good, you know, what I think is a stronger argument against that than that's an argument for it, is the fact that this is Adam receiving signs and tokens from Peter, which is not something that it's something that confuses a lot of mainstream members. I've heard repeatedly this confusion of why are Peter, James, and John administering to Adam. It doesn't make sense to them. And it really doesn't make sense in the context that a disembodied spirit should not be giving the token to, doing a handshake with Adam if he's a disembodied spirit, according to Joseph Smith's teachings in section 129. And so that's, I think, a stronger argument against the messengers. I think we should appreciate a lot of what the apostles did to preserve the endowment ceremony and to systematize it, that Joseph kind of instructed those who had been endowed by him to to perfect the layout of the ceremony. But I do think that this specific change is more of a negative than a positive that leads to a lot of confusion. It was added primarily to bolster apostolic succession. And so I think that, the messengers who appeared to Adam were, not messengers, not Peter, James, and John. It would have made sense for them to be the ones to administer to Adam. And I believe that in Joseph Smith's lifetime, that the teaching was that these angels came from the previous world where Adam came from. I believe that this is, that context is the reason that Orson Pratt made this statement in Journal of Discourses, Volume 15, page 321 in 1873. He said, quote, these angels that came to Adam were not men who had been redeemed from this earth, not men who had been translated from this earth, but they pertained to former worlds. They understood about the coming of Jesus, the nature of these sacrifices, etc. Some of these angels have received their exaltation and still are called angels. For instance, Michael has received his exaltation. He is not without his kingdom and crown, wife or wives and posterity, because he lived faithfully to the end. Who is he? Our first great progenitor. Adam is called Michael the Prince. I am mentioning now things that the Latter-day Saints are acquainted with. Many of these things I have just been quoting are revelations given to us, as those who are readers will recollect. Some of these angels have received their exaltation. They are kings, they are priests, they have entered into their glory and sit upon thrones. They hold the scepter over their posterity. And so, I think that it's important to recognize the importance of Joseph Smith's teachings on the endowment, um, rather than just accepting kind of watered down symbolic interpretation. I believe that one of the key reasons that symbolic interpretations have been, more and more accepted by the mainstream church has been especially since the COVID changes to the endowment. I was actually really surprised when I heard about the changes that happened um, after the pandemic started, where the church stopped giving the tokens and the endowment when previously the instructions were we desire all to receive it and everyone needed to receive the token from the administrators. And so the church got rid of that because of the pandemic, and they just kind of showed you the token on the screen, and then they still gave it at the veil, but they basically kind of said that the witness couple kind of represent all of you receiving this token is kind of what that initial change. But then a couple years later, the church and my friend who mentioned this to me actually said they were kind of they were pretty disturbed by this change, and they were like, I really hope that when the church when the pandemic is over, that the church will go back to the way it was before. And that's kind of a naive, hope for somebody to think that the church, after doing away with something, will go ahead and restore something that they did away with. Is that ever really the pattern of apostasy for people to, restore something that they decided to change and reject? And so, of course, what happened instead was that the church, after the pandemic was over, doubled down on doing away with giving the tokens in the ceremony, with getting rid of the witness couple altogether. And so it's just part of many of the unfortunate changes to the ceremonies. And if we believe what Joseph Smith taught about the ceremonies, the ordinances are not to be altered or changed, but all must be saved upon the same principles. So that's why I think it's very important to understand and comprehend the original teachings on the importance of the temple ordinances as taught by Joseph Smith and his worthy contemporaries. And I say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.